any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself.
The siren sounded for 2 minutes, bringing the nation to a halt to honor the millions of Jews murdered by the Nazis during the Second World War.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog attended a wreath-laying ceremony at a Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem.
Some soldiers marked the day at the Nova Music Festival site, the location of the bloodiest incident in the Hamas terror attack on southern Israel.
The memorial was Israel's first Holocaust Remembrance Day since the October 7th attack, adding additional meaning to the already somber day. And Israel's Holocaust commemorations this year have a powerful significance for 6 elderly survivors. They're deeply affected by the Hamas terror attacks that sparked the ongoing Gaza war. Here's their story.
86-year-old Bella Haim fled with her family as a child from Poland during World War II. On October 7th last year, her grandson Yotam, like her a resident of a village near the Gaza border, was taken hostage by Hamas. He managed to escape, only to be accidentally shot dead by Israeli soldiers. The trauma drove Haim to return to Poland, where she will on Monday take part in the March of the Living at the site of the Auschwitz death camp. The annual ceremony is timed to coincide with Israel's Holocaust Memorial Day. Holocaust commemorations this year have a searing significance for her and 6 other elderly survivors now deeply scarred by the Hamas attack that sparked the ongoing Gaza war.
What happened here on October 7th, it's impossible to believe. I see the huge picture mounted in the new library in Jerusalem with all those who were killed and murdered. It's impossible. To this day, I cannot fathom. I'm running away from it.
A veteran campaigner for peace with the Palestinians, Haim said she would no longer pursue that activism. Now what interests me is only my people, she added. Among those joining her will be 90-year-old Daniel Luz. His hometown kibbutz Be'eri lost a tenth of its residents to the Palestinian attackers. In some ways, he said, that ordeal was worse for him than the European war, when he escaped Nazi roundups in his native France, although half of his family perished in Poland.
In France, as a child, I suffered all kinds of traumas that I've learned to cope with. But in Be'eri, it was the first time that I felt the fear of death.
On October 7th last year, he woke up to the sound of Arabic yelling and gunfire. A neighboring house was riddled with bullets. Lutz was untouched. He says he imagined the souls of the 6 million Holocaust victims steering Hamas away from him.
An 88-year-old Holocaust survivor is participating in a new digital campaign called Cancel Hate. The New York-based Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany launched the initiative recently. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the latest.
Last Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Israel and had a quote-unquote tough conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu regarding a possible Israeli operation in Rafah, the one now moving forward.
Insane.
You know, this is according to 2 sources who were briefed on the meeting. They say that Blinken told Netanyahu during that meeting that, quote, a major military operation in Rafah would lead to the U.S. publicly opposing it. It would negatively impact U.S.-Israel relations. Now, the difficult thing is, it seems Israel is not really listening to the U.S. on this. They're going to move forward with it. And again, they just gave the evacuation notice to Rafah. Now, of course, this is based on sources of Axios, so we'll see how this develops as things go forward. Times of Israel seem to an extent, refute some of the claims that the U.S. is withholding ammunition from Israel, though. Times of Israel said a White House national security spokesperson declines to confirm the report, saying they don't comment on individual cases. However, it says the spokesperson notes that the U.S. has surged billions of dollars in security assistance to Israel since the October 7 attacks, passed the largest ever supplemental appropriation for emergency assistance to Israel, led in a president coalition to defend Israel against Iranian attacks, and will continue to do what is necessary, they say, to ensure Israel can defend itself from threats it faces. But speaking to Ynet, an Israeli official downplayed the Axios report, saying, quote, even now, a continued series of defense shipments are being sent from the U.S. to Israel. They say it's possible that one shipment or another is delayed, but the flow continues and we're not aware of a policy decision to stop it, the official adds. Now, the problem with that is that there's a lot of contradicting reports, to be honest. And the allegations of the United States delaying ammo shipments are consistent with concerns currently being raised by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Blinken actually recently spoke at the World Economic Forum, and it was an event in Saudi Arabia, and he explained the push for a peace deal. They're trying to get Israel and Hamas to come down and make an agreement, and it doesn't seem that either side is fully budging on it. Now, he explained a limit in regards to this on U.S. support in the ongoing war. Watch this.
The quickest way to bring this to an end is to get to a ceasefire and the release of hostages. Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. We can't support a major military operation in Rafah. And we have not yet seen a plan that gives us confidence that civilians can be effectively protected.
Look, on all this, it seems that the Biden administration really wants to bring an end to the conflict. And, I saw many people mentioning, especially in the comments on the show, the hypocrisy with that, because, when Russia and Ukraine were talking about making a peace deal, the allegation has been for a long time that the Biden administration had intervened and stopped that from happening. The question then is, why are they taking a different stance between Israel and Hamas? And a lot of people are pointing to, well, maybe it's because the Democrats are divided over this, and it's frankly turning into a political disaster for them. But regardless of what you think, regardless of why you think this might be happening, they're trying to get both sides to come to terms. Blinken is also pointing to some concerns the U.S. government has with the way Israel is handling the war. They're not taking a hard stance on either side. They're defending Israel, supporting it to an extent, but they're trying to play both sides. And they're suggesting the U.S. is reaching its limit on supporting some of Israel's planned operations. Again, Rafah seems to be one of the red lines. And Blinken is suggesting the United States cannot support Israel in these unless it can get a real plan of protecting civilians. They have not yet gotten that plan, they say, as you just saw in that video. Now, the Biden administration has been caught in a particularly difficult position with this. It seems, again, they're trying to continue U.S. support for Israel. This has been a long-term U.S. policy. They're not getting off of that. But at the same time, they're trying to keep Israel restrained in its war with Hamas. Israel is not really listening to the United States. Benjamin Netanyahu continually basically signals that if the U.S. isn't with them, they'll do it alone. And at the same time, the U.S. is also trying to conduct humanitarian missions in Gaza, and the people in Gaza seem to not be very happy about it, let's put it that way. While at the same time, they're trying to keep the conflict from spreading among other Muslim countries. Blinken notably has been traveling to Saudi Arabia, as you just saw. He's been traveling to different countries in the region, meeting with the leadership, and we don't know the full context of what's said behind closed doors, but it seems like he's trying to rein this in. They're trying to prevent this from spreading. And even when it comes to Iran, they're trying to stop this war from turning into a battle between Israel and Iran directly. Now, as Blinken noted, a peace deal is on the table. But take note of what Blinken also said at the end of that clip we just watched. These are his exact words. Blinken said, "We've said clearly and for some time now on Rafah that in the absence of a plan to ensure that civilians will not be harmed, we can't support a major military operation in Rafah. We have not yet seen a plan that gives us confidence that civilians can be effectively protected." In other words, Blinken is saying that's a red line. He's suggesting that if Israel does in fact move forward with the invasion of Rafah, they're not going to have U.S. support on that particular mission. And of course, that's one of the big issues on the Israeli side as well. This is where the U.S. position amidst all this gets complicated.
We've moved so far away from the Constitution that in many ways we don't even recognize it.
In Hillsdale College's most popular online course,
look like Israel is going to agree to any terms unless it means Hamas loses control in Gaza. Reuters said that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, hardened his rejection of Hamas demands for an end to the Gaza war in exchange for the freeing of hostages. They said, hey, we'll let the people go, but we stay in power, essentially. Benjamin Netanyahu says no deal, basically. It says that he said on Sunday that would keep the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas in power and pose a threat to Israel. Netanyahu said Israel was willing to pause fighting in Gaza in order to secure the release of hostages still being held by Hamas, believed to be more than 130. But he said, but while Israel has shown willingness, Hamas remains entrenched in its extreme positions, first among them the demand to remove all our forces from the Gaza Strip, end the war, and leave Hamas in power. And he said Israel cannot accept that. He added Hamas would be able to achieve its promise of carrying out again and again and again its massacres, rapes, and kidnappings. And notes that in Cairo, Hamas leaders held a second day of truce talks with Egyptian and Qatari mediators with no apparent progress reported as the group maintained its demand that any agreement must end the war in Gaza, Palestinian officials said. So basically, one of the big narratives for a long time is that as soon as Hamas releases the hostages, the war comes to an end. It seems that is no longer the case. They were offered this as the terms of ending the war, and Netanyahu is saying that no, the terms have changed. It now will not accept a Palestine or Gaza where Hamas remains in power because they say it's a terrorist group and there's going to be attack after attack. They'll never see the end of it, they're saying. So the terms of truce have now changed. It seems there can be no possibility that does not end with the annihilation of Hamas, which is what they're suggesting, which is also going to make some very difficult things for the Biden administration as they try to push for this peace deal. Now, the problem with Hamas is that they're technically a democratically elected government. The people voted for them, but they're also a terrorist organization. They've shown they're willing to use civilians as human shields, and civilian deaths are also ironically helping them in the global narrative war. And this is, of course, the problem of having a terrorist group being one of the main fighters in a war. Terrorism, by definition, goes after civilians. Terrorism, by definition, doesn't just go after combatants. It will use civilians as human shields. It will try to fight a narrative battle. And of course, killing civilians, as is now happening, seems to be helping Hamas because when Israel kills them, it then fuels the global narrative war. Now look, with any modern war, there are always at least two main battles being fought. There's the physical war, right? The war of bullets, as they would call it. But there's also the narrative war, the war of words. You know, for the United States, this has been a harsh lesson for a lot of our wars. In Vietnam, for example, the Viet Cong would have said that they fought two wars. They fought the war of bullets, and they fought the war of words. They say they lost the war of bullets. America, for example, was judging success in the battle just by how many Viet Cong they were killing. They were saying, look at how we're decimating the enemy. Look at how, their forces are dwindling. But of course, for the Viet Cong, they were fighting a two-front battle. The second front was the war of words. The second front was the protests on American college campuses, as we're seeing right now. The second front was politicians, of course, backing that and saying that America was the person in the wrong in that battle. And because of that, even though America won the war of bullets, won the fighting war, they lost the war of words. Because they lost the narrative war, they lost the overall war. And unfortunately, we've seen this a couple times now. We saw the same thing in Iraq. We also saw the same thing in Afghanistan. America won the war of bullets. We won the fighting war, but we lost the narrative war, to a large extent at least. Now, for Hamas, they're of course facing annihilation, which is the other side of it. There is the possibility Israel will kill the group's fighters and hunt down all of its leaders. The question, though, is going to be whether that will actually bring an end to the terrorist organization, Hamas, or whether it will prevent a future terror attack against Israel. And, the United States, of course, has seen similar lessons. Again, we fought a 20-year war in Afghanistan. Is another example. America, we pushed out Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda used to be in control of Afghanistan, and then the battle turned against the Taliban, which then filled the vacuum when Al Qaeda was pushed out. And then what happened? Despite more than 20 years of killing the Taliban, as soon as the U.S. pulled out its troops, the Taliban immediately took over the country. And now we're seeing a resurgence in Afghanistan of ISIS as well, a new terrorist group, arguably worse than Al Qaeda. And despite the entire force of the U.S. military, the most powerful military in the face of the earth, the U.S. operations were not able to bring an end to the Taliban. Now, despite taking out the group's leaders, despite taking out their fighters and so on, as Israel's trying to do with Hamas right now, and this is because it was an insurgency. It was a war of belief, a narrative battle right alongside that whole war of bullets. The fuel behind the war is and was the war of ideas. And in the end, we saw the war of perception turned out to have been the real battle. The United States lost the war of perception. And that turned out to have been really what we should have been focusing more on, apparently. And this also makes the Israel-Hamas war so complicated. It's technically a religious war, and it's also a proxy war. Iran is supporting Hamas behind the scenes. It was known for years, for example, that Iran will, pay the families of suicide attackers when they go against Israel. And even if Hamas gets decimated, it's also having the effect of a global propaganda push that's sparking a new global resurgence of terrorist groups, while also working as a key narrative battle, notably, that's impacting not just Israel, but the United States as well, because we get grouped in with everything they do. Now, this is also likely why Blinken was expressing concerns over Israel's plans to expand its war into Rafah, something, again, that they announced that they called for evacuations this morning, in fact. Now, Rafah is a city in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. It's also where around 1 million displaced Palestinians are seeking shelter. Now, if we go by PBS, it seems Israel is planning the attack on Rafah regardless of the peace deal. Again, they signaled they're going to do it this morning, regardless of U.S. trying to stop them from doing it. They're again calling for people to evacuate. There's only some places they can go. But they're saying that even if they have a peace deal, they're going to do it anyways. Here's an official quote from his office obtained by PBS. Again, Netanyahu. He said this: "The idea that we will stop the war before achieving all its goals is out of the question." Again, this is Netanyahu, according to a statement from his office obtained by PBS. And he said, "We will enter Rafah and we will eliminate Hamas. And it's the battalions there, with or without a deal, to achieve the total victory." Now, look, of course, we'll see what happens. Based on surface-level reporting, it does not seem this position has changed. A Hamas delegation was in Cairo on Saturday's Egyptian state media reported, according to AP, and they said that they saw noticeable progress in ceasefire talks for Gaza. But it says Israel has not sent a delegation, and a senior Israeli official downplayed prospects for a full end of the war while emphasizing the commitment to invading Rafah. In other words, even though they're having a peace deal on the table, it doesn't seem that they're fully in on it, unless it's some smoke and mirrors, which might be the case as well. AP notes that pressure has mounted to reach a deal halting the nearly 7-month-long war. A top UN official says there is now a full-blown famine in northern Gaza, while the United States has repeatedly warned close ally Israel about its planned offensive into Rafah, now starting, the southernmost city on the border with Egypt, where, again, more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering. Egyptian and U.S. mediators have reported signs of compromise in recent days, but chances for a ceasefire deal remain entangled with the key question whether Israel will accept an end to the war without reaching its stated goal of destroying the militant group Hamas. And it's in Egypt's state-owned Al-Qari News TV channel said that a consensus has been reached over many disputed points, but did not elaborate. They say that Hamas has called for a complete end to the war and withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Gaza. And of course, that's one of the challenges. If Hamas is the negotiator and the terms on the table are, well, elimination, why would they agree to it? And that's, of course, the challenge because Israel's saying that, unless they get rid of Hamas in its entirety, there's going to be future attacks. They need to defend themselves from future attacks. I would argue that Hamas doesn't really care about the lives of civilians. And frankly, if it means staying in power, they're probably not going to agree to be annihilated to save some civilians. But look, there's also the issue of what the situation would look like even after the official war comes to an end. Just having a peace deal is not going to end this conflict. This is going to be very likely a long war. We talk about this, though, more only on epictv.com. Before we jump, though, my new documentary, Weapons of Mass Migration, is out this Friday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's finally happening, folks. Now, in it, I expose how, of course, the United Nations and the Biden administration have been working to facilitate mass migration into the United States. This is not just an organic problem. We've been told the narratives, right? We've been told it's all caused by Texas busing people into, Martha's Vineyard or into California and elsewhere. We've seen lawsuits over this. In fact, California was threatening to sue Texas for human trafficking, blaming, of course, the migrant crisis on Texas. A lot of the corporate media have been playing that narrative as well. But is that really the case? Well, no. It turns out the United States has joined an agreement with the United Nations called the Global Compact for Migration. And this policy has set in motion all the different systems to facilitate mass migration into the United States and into Western Europe and also Canada and a couple other countries. And we're not being told about this. We've not been told this directly. In this documentary, I, of course, go into Panama. I go into the camps themselves. I show you the United Nations checkpoints. I interview leadership down there. We go to the United Nations facilities, and we show you exactly what is happening all the way, again, in Latin America and also on the U.S. side, where we found as well that on the U.S. side, there's just processing facilities. When they arrest people, they're not throwing them in prison. When they arrest people, they are processing them, giving them free airplane tickets, and then releasing them on the streets of the United States. A lot of people have seen evidence of this. They've seen small pieces of it. I will show you in this documentary what is actually happening. And not only that, but the systems behind it. This is going to be a very, very important documentary. Again, it comes out this Friday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find a link to it in the description below. Again, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time this Friday, which is May 9th. Let me show you a trailer before we jump.
An unrelenting stream of immigration. Non-stop.
According to statistics, around 7.2 million illegal immigrants entered the United States under President Joe Biden alone. They have United Nations facilities here, and the people pushing this are leading people to their death.
To what extent is the United Nations facilitating the border crisis?
They're being overridden by international powers.
We are not authorized to talk.
It is a humanitarian business now.
And they said, oh yeah, these are the debit cards. We're giving these debit cards to immigrants.
Why all the cloak and dagger? Why are we being so stealthy about this?
Some of these people have gone on record and publicly talked about this, people close to Barack Obama.
It gives 12 million people on the path to citizenship and eventually voters.
I've been researching, of course, what's happening, but I want to know why it's happening.
We'll see chaos on a global scale until America is extinguished and the power shifts completely to the east.